Richard Feynman was a leading theoretical physicist who received a Nobel Prize for his work in quantum electrodynamics. He was notorious for asking his fellow mathematicians to explain concepts in simple language to test their understanding.
Do you know the name of that bird? I says, I haven't the slightest idea. He said, well, it's a brown-throated thrush. He says, your father doesn't teach you anything. But my father had already taught me about the names of birds. We walked and he says, that's a brown-throated thrush. He says, know what the name of that bird is? A brown-throated thrush. In German, it's called a Flügelflögel. In Chinese, it's called a Ting-Long-Tong. In Japanese, a Tohla-Tohara, and so on. And when you know all the names in every language of that bird, you know nothing, but absolutely nothing. Crazy idea. I don't know, it's hard to make up a very crazy one thing. Witches or something like that, and you tell about what people used to believe in witches, and of course nobody believes in witches now, and you say, how could they believe in witches? Then you turn around and you say, let's see, what witches do we believe in now? What ceremonies do we do? Every morning we brush our teeth. What is the evidence that the brushing the teeth does us any good in cavities? So you start wondering, are we all, imagine as the Earth turns on the orbit, there's an edge between light and dark. And along that edge, all the people along that edge are doing the same ritual for no good reason. Just like in the Middle Ages, they had other rituals. And you try to picture this perpetual line of toothbrushes going around the Earth. It's to take the world from another point of view. Now, it may well be that brushing teeth is a very good thing because it gets rid of cavities, and you can find out whether it does or it doesn't by trying to find out. Now, you can ask your dentist, and he says, of course. And you say, how about evidence? I have not found the evidence from dentists because they just learned it in school. Now, I'm not trying to argue that it's good or bad to brush teeth. What I'm trying to argue for is to think about things from a new point of view. One Sunday, all the kids were all walking in little parties with their fathers in the woods. Then the next Monday, we were playing in a field. And the kid said to me, say, what's that bird? What's the name of it? Do you know the name of that bird? I says, I haven't the slightest idea. He said, well, it's a brown-throated thrush. He says, your father doesn't teach you anything. But my father had already taught me about the names of birds. We walked and he says, that's a brown-throated thrush. He says, know what the name of that bird is? A brown-throated thrush. In German, it's called a Flügelflögel. In Chinese, it's called a Ting-Long-Tong. In Japanese, a Tohla-Tohara, and so on. And when you know all the names in every language of that bird, you know nothing, but absolutely nothing about the bird. And then we would go on and talk about the pecking and the feathers. So I had learned already that names don't constitute knowledge. It's knowing the name of something. That's caused me a certain trouble since, because I refuse to learn the name of anything. So when someone comes in and says, you got any explanation for the Fitz-Clonan experiment? I says, what's that? He says, you know, that the long-lived K-meson disintegrates into 2 pies. Oh, yes, now I know. But I never know the names of things. What he forgot to tell me was that knowing the names of things is useful if you want to talk to somebody else. So you tell him what you're talking about.
But the basic principle of knowing about something rather than just knowing its name is something that you stuck to, is it?
Yes, of course. You have to learn. These are kind of disciplines in the field of science that you have to learn. That to know when you know and when you don't know, and what it is you know and what it is you don't know. And it's you got to be very careful not to confuse yourself.
How else did he try and
progress?
Mold your methods of thinking, the way you looked at the world?
Well, we had a lot of little games, like he would say at the dinner table. He'd think of some little problem, and he'd say, suppose you were a Martian, we were Martians, and we came down to this Earth, and we'd look at it from the outside. And that, I can't explain exactly what he meant, but there's a way of looking something anew, as if you never saw it before, for the first time, and asking questions about it as if you were different. For instance, if you would ask, later I did some little amusing research for a paper in college on sleep, but it started with a question of his kind. Suppose you were a Martian who never slept. They didn't have sleep. You didn't have to sleep. And you came down to this Earth and you saw these people who had this funny property that every day for a certain amount of time, I have to lie down and become unconscious. And then the natural question would be, how does it feel to get unconscious? What happens to you? Ideas run along and suddenly they stop, or do they just run more and more slowly? But what happens to your ideas? How does it feel to become unconscious? So I tried to answer the question, what happens when you become unconscious?
But do you find that these days you still, when you're faced with a particularly difficult problem, when you're absolutely stuck, you tend to say, let's look at it like a Martian would look at it and stand
Sometimes. There are lots of things that people did. For example, Maxwell put the equations together. The Faraday, he formulated the equations mathematically with some model in his head. And then Dirac got his answer by just writing and guessing an equation. And other people got their answer, like in relativity, got the idea by looking at principles of symmetry. Now, all these methods, and Heisenberg got his quantum mechanics by thinking only talk about the things that you can measure. Now, all of these ideas, we should only talk about things that we can measure. Try to define things in terms of only things you can measure. Or let's formulate the equation mathematically. Or let's guess the equation. Or all these things are tried all the time. Look for symmetries. All that stuff is tried. All that stuff, when we're going against the problem, we do all that. That's very useful. But we all know that. That's what we learn in the physics classes, how to do that. But the new problem, where we're stuck because all those methods don't work. If any of those methods would have worked, we would have gone through there. So when we get stuck in a certain place, it's a place where history will not repeat herself. And that's makes it even more exciting, because whatever we're going to look at the method and the trick and the way it's going to look is going to be very different than anything that we've seen before, because we've used all the methods from before. So, therefore, a thing like the history of the idea is an accident of how things actually happen. And if I want to turn the history around to try to get a new way of looking at it, it doesn't make any difference. Absolutely, especially if he's a good paleontologist. Because he's a good paleontologist, he's not just looking at old rocks. He's looking at the history of the Earth. He's looking, when he stands and he looks at his own fingers, and he knows it's got 5 bumps. And he thinks of how did it evolve with 5 bumps. It's got the same as whales, and so on. And we keep talking about the importance of the fact that the thumb opposes. Then we can start discussing, is it really so important that the thumb or is it language that has been evolved, the system of symbols, or the size of the brain? This is a paleontologist. I can talk about this stuff. That's close to his field. Dolphins have bigger brains than we are. They have a signaling system, and you get interested in that, and you start to discuss all that they know about dolphins, and you complain that the way the United States Navy has been doing its experiments is not right, and we ought to find out more about dolphins. And you go on and on. You talk, those are things of the day. They're just as good, but you can go on and on. When I talk to a playwright or something, I find, because I don't go to plays or something, I don't find it easy to talk to them. I don't get much out of it.
I was going to say, this is because you can talk to scientists in other fields, presumably because you read the scientific magazines, presumably, and hear the scientific gossip rather than...
No, because we don't have to have magazines or gossip. We think originally. We think of a new idea. We talk to each other and we try to look at something from a new point of view, and we delight each other in a new point of view. And when you're talking to somebody else who's trying to think of something new, different, and he thinks he's thought about the whales or the dolphins, and he has some little thing he's thought of that's a little different than the thing that you've thought of. And so when you're talking back and forth, he's excited by your point of view about dreams, and you're excited by his little observation that he has made about dreams, if he has happened to have thought about that. So the point is, and our backgrounds give us a slightly different point of view. I mean, a scientific background. Like I specialize in physics, to say he specializes in paleontology. So his information on dreams might be more deeper, more evolutionary. For example, he can't, we don't have a way of telling, I suppose, about the evolution of dreams, but he might know, for example, about other animals. He might have thought about whether other animals dream and what the signs are, and all other things that I hadn't thought of. I can't make it up now because I'm not the paleontologist, but I believe that, yes, I find always that a good man, I take it all back. A good man, I talk to good men in other fields. A good man, I talk to good men in other fields. There's certain kinds of men in every field that I can talk to as well as I can talk to a good scientist. I met a historian, or a writer of history, from France once, and I had a marvelous conversation with him. Maurois, his name was Andre Maurois. And then I met an artist, Robert Irwin, who's a very important artist in Los Angeles in modern art, and I could talk to him at the same depth of excitement. So I take it all back. If you give me the right man in any field, I can talk to him. I know what the condition is, that he did whatever he did as far as he can go, that he studied every aspect of it as far as he has stretched himself to the end. He's not a dilettante in any way. And so he talked deep as far as he can go, and therefore he's up against mysteries all the way around the edge. And awe. And we can talk about mystery and awe. That's what we have in common.